Uh, I said, well, I never thought about singing with anybody because I'd always been up on my own, up at the sharp end.
Robert Plant was never born to become a god. The legend behind the voice of Led Zeppelin, the band that sold over 300 million records, created songs that shaped the entire history of rock and turned Plant into an icon worshipped by an entire generation. But behind that monument lies a journey full of loss. From a boy who left home very early to pursue music, to a father who lost his child, an artist who lost his companion, and finally the dissolution of an entire legend. Even today, at the age of 76, that pain has refused to leave. It lives on with him in prolonged silence, as the ailments of old age set in, and through moments so cold that even time itself is powerless. And before we delve deeper into that journey, if Robert Plant's voice has ever been with you during difficult years, leave a heart as a quiet thank you to the man who once held us back to life. Robert Plant was not born under stage lights, nor in an artistic family. He was born on the 20th of August, 1948, in West Bromwich, an industrial town in post-war England. That was a time when the country was still patching itself up after bombs, where dreams were often shrunk to fit dinner and the end-of-month rent. Energy was scarce, opportunities limited, and the future was rarely spoken of as a luxury. His father, Robert C. Plant, was a civil engineering surveyor, a man who represented order, discipline. His mother, Annie Kane Plant, was gentler, more sensitive, and the first to realize her son was different from other children. The family was not poor, but neither were they affluent. They had enough to live, but not enough to dream. Plant grew up among factories, thick black chimneys, and endless gray roads. His childhood was not tied to sunshine or meadows, but to mechanical sounds and the steady rhythm of working-class life. In a home where responsibility was valued more than passion. His father expected his son to study properly, have a stable career, live a respectable life. But from very early on, Plant felt he could not fit into that mold. He once said in an interview with The Guardian that he always had the feeling of living in a world where everyone knew where they were going, except me. Not because of the family, but because the surrounding space seemed too narrow for the thoughts growing inside him. Plant began turning to American blues music that was strange to England at the time. Blues spoke of suffering, of loss, of people pushed to the margins. Strangely, Plant found deep resonance in those stories, even though he had not experienced similar tragedies. Perhaps, from a young age, Plant already carried the feeling of an outsider. When very young, Plant became obsessed with Elvis Presley's voice. He admitted in an interview with The Guardian that the moment he first heard Elvis awakened something that never went back to sleep in him. For a boy raised in discipline and structure, that was an irreversible collision. Blues and rock and roll were not just music, they were a promise that somewhere out there was another life. And for Plant, that was the only place where he felt truly alive. At school, Plant was not bad, but not outstanding either. Numbers, tests, and a predetermined future tired him. School hours felt like a delay, something he had to endure before returning to records and evenings, wandering to listen to music. Eventually, Plant dropped out, left home at just 16. It was not a romantic decision, but a trade-off, leaving the safety of years for a freedom that had no clear shape yet. His father opposed it, not harshly, but with deep disappointment. It was not an explosive conflict, but a prolonged silence, the kind that makes a young person feel they have let others down. His mother, though she did not fully understand her son, was the one who quietly supported him. Plant later admitted that without his mother, he probably would not have dared to go that far. No long-term plan, no savings, no plan B. The only thing he carried was his voice and belief. Later in the documentary Led Zeppelin, Heaven and Earth, he said, "I left home very early. I didn't think far ahead. I only knew that if I didn't go, I would slowly die there." The years that followed were truly wandering days for Plant. He sang in small blues bands, performed in rundown pubs, halls where the audience was often louder than the band. He slept at friends' houses, on floors, even periods when he did not know where he would stay that night. Money earned from music was not enough to live on, forcing Plant to do all kinds of manual labor, from asphalt laying for a construction company to working in a department store. No big contracts, no mentors. No one told Plant, "You will become a legend." Yet, thanks to his unique singing style, Plant soon became known in the underground scene with the nickname the Wild Man of Blues from the Black Country. His voice was not formally trained, but full of instinct, screaming, moaning, sometimes fierce, sometimes fragile. Not to impress, it was the voice of someone with nothing left to hide. That very quality led Plant to the fateful moment in 1968, the meeting with Jimmy Page. At that time, Jimmy Page was looking for a vocalist for a new project after the Yardbirds disbanded. Plant was not the only name, nor the safest choice. But right in the audition, when Plant sang "Somebody to Love," Page recognized something very different. Later, Page recalled in an interview with Rolling Stone, "He didn't just sing, he poured his whole self into it." Plant was chosen for his wildness, something that cannot be taught or faked. It was the rawness of someone who had lived close enough to failure to no longer fear it. Someone with nothing to lose, so he dared to go further than anyone. From the beginning, Robert Plant's path was a solitary one. Even when standing in a band, his nature remained that of a wanderer, always searching, always leaving, never fully belonging anywhere. Led Zeppelin would take him to the pinnacle of the world, but what shaped Plant, the solitude, survival instinct, and deep unease had been there long before the stage lights. And those very things, when combined with enormous fame, would create a painful paradox. A man born to wander, yet held tightly by the world in the image of a god. Led Zeppelin did not climb to the top, they exploded. In just under 2 years after forming, Led Zeppelin went from small studios to packed stadiums. They broke every rock standard: audience size, revenue, fervor level. Unlike bands that rose gradually, Zeppelin was like a whirlwind, sweeping everything away before anyone could stand firm. The debut album in 1969 immediately caused a shock. The second took them to #1. And by Led Zeppelin 4, the name Robert Plant was no longer simply a singer, he became an icon. That rise happened so fast that Robert Plant barely had time to understand what was happening to himself. One day, still an unknown blues singer, the next standing before tens of thousands screaming his name. In an interview with Rolling Stone, Plant admitted, "Everything came too fast. I never had a chance to adapt to becoming what people thought I was." From very early on, Plant was boxed into the golden god image. Long hair, slender build, open-chested shirts, soaring, instinctive voice. The media did not see him as a 20-something young man learning to live, but as an archetype of sexuality, power, and wildness. Plant became the image before he could become the person. The whole world saw Robert Plant as a collective dream. The problem was, Robert Plant was not inherently cold. He was sensitive, more introverted than his appearance. That made being seen as an icon rather than a human create an ever-widening distance between him and the world around him. In the early years, Plant accepted it. He was too young to understand that becoming an icon did not mean being protected. But the machine called Led Zeppelin could not stop. When a band becomes a global phenomenon, the individuals inside it almost lose the priority of self. The pressure of fame did not come from the audience, it came from internal expectations. Each new album had to be bigger, heavier, more intense than the last. Each tour had to be larger, longer, more exhausting. Plant once shared with Rolling Stone that there were times he felt he was no longer a singer, but a component that had to operate at full capacity every night. The endless shows turned Plant's life into a chain of identical spaces. Stage, backstage, hotel, plane. One thing very few people realized. Robert Plant never actively wanted to become an idol. He wanted to sing, wanted to stand on stage, wanted to release emotions through music. But the world did not stop there. In 1968, when Led Zeppelin was not yet a legend, Plant married Maureen Wilson, the woman who had been with him from the unknown days. They had children together, a home that Plant once believed could be an anchor amid his wandering life. But being a father under those conditions was almost impossible. Marriage to a rock superstar has never been easy. Plant loved his wife and children, but most of the time he was not home. Tours lasting months, even years, turned family into something always waiting. There were periods when he left home while the children were sleeping and returned when they had grown a little more. In the documentary Led Zeppelin, Heaven and Earth, Plant admitted, "I had a family, but I did not live with them like a normal man. I was always on the road." Led Zeppelin's schedule at that time had almost no gaps. Back-to-back nights did not allow the body to rest, let alone the mind to stop. Worse, Plant began feeling estranged from his own voice. For many singers, the voice is identity. But when that voice becomes a brand, it also turns into a burden. Plant had to sing to expectations, recreate old emotions, return to the same image even when he himself had changed. Each performance was no longer purely music, but duty. In an interview with The Guardian, Plant admitted that there were times he no longer recognized himself in Led Zeppelin recordings because they belonged to a different person, a younger, bolder Robert Plant, not yet worn down by reality. He had everything: fame, money, cultural power. But the very ordinary things, presence, stability, the feeling of being himself, gradually slipped away. He could command the stage, but not time, could control the crowd, but not his own emotions. Unlike some other artists who turned to rebellion to resist, Plant chose silent endurance. But that very suppression made the inner cracks deeper. And then, while Plant was still struggling with who he was amid that spotlight, life had prepared blows that no title could withstand. They were direct hits, taking away things Plant never thought he would lose, leaving wounds that no stage could hide. In August 1975, during a family vacation in Greece, Robert Plant was in a serious car accident. The car lost control, crashed hard. Plant broke multiple bones, severe injuries to his leg and ankle. For many months afterward, Plant could only use a wheelchair, dependent on others for the most basic activities. For an artist who saw the stage as his place of existence, that helplessness was like having his identity stripped away. In an interview with Rolling Stone, Plant recalled, "I used to think I was invincible. That accident made me realize how fragile my body was." Throughout Led Zeppelin's early years, Plant lived with the youthful feeling of immortality. The stage was where he controlled everything: breath, voice, the gaze of tens of thousands. But when confined to a wheelchair, Plant first understood what it meant to be deprived of presence. Recovery took a long time, but the psyche never returned to the way it was. Plant began realizing that his voice, which he once saw as instinct, was actually far more fragile. Led Zeppelin continued. The band adjusted the schedule. Jimmy Page and the others found ways to adapt. But Plant was different. He was facing for the first time the question, if one day I can no longer stand on stage, who am I? Yet, this accident, though painful, was not the greatest tragedy in Robert Plant's life. 2 years later, in 1977, Led Zeppelin was on a U.S. tour, one of the biggest and most pressured of their career. Plant had returned to the stage, but not as before. More cautious, more careful, and his mind always carried a vague unease. Plant still called home regularly. Those were short, hurried calls amid a packed schedule, the only thing that helped him cling to the sense of family amid the relentless spin of fame. Then bad news struck. On the 26th of July, 1977, Plant received a telegram. His son, Karac Pendragon Plant, had died in England at only 5 years old. from a rare intestinal virus infection. Plant was thousands of miles from home, unable to say a final goodbye. He immediately canceled the tour and flew home. In the documentary Led Zeppelin, Heaven and Earth, Plant spoke of that moment. Everything stopped. Not the band, not the tour, but my life. Karac's death was not just a personal loss. It completely shattered the concept of trade-off that Plant had once believed in. Trading family time for success, trading presence for glory. Suddenly, every reason for being away from home became meaningless. The pain of a father losing a child has no language. Plant no longer cared about lights, schedules, fame. All vanished before an empty room where a child's laughter should have been. Karac was only 5, not old enough to understand who his father was to the world, not old enough to remember the long trips, and not yet aware how much the man who was often away loved him. Just weeks after the funeral, Robert Plant returned to America to resume Led Zeppelin's interrupted tour. This decision remains controversial to this day. Some say Plant was too cold. Others understand he did not know where else to escape. In a BBC interview, Plant said, "I wasn't strong enough to stay still." After all, Robert Plant could share the stage with tens of thousands. But the pain of losing a child, he carried it alone. After his son's death, Plant fell into a state many close to him described as prolonged silence. He no longer wanted to talk about music or listen to old recordings. He even avoided songs that evoked family memories. On a deeper level, Plant carried an unspoken question. What if he had been home more that day? He rarely mentioned regret directly, but in many interviews, Plant always spoke of absence, the long trips, the times he could not return, the family moments missed because of tour schedules. All My Love, the song released on the album In Through the Outdoor, one of the rare, gentle, melancholic tracks in the band's catalog. But for Plant, it was not a hit. It was a belated apology to a son no longer there. Music at this point was no longer a refuge. It became a place to confront pain. Later, Plant rarely spoke directly about guilt, but in many interviews, he mentioned absence as something irreparable. Fame demands trade-offs, and Plant paid with the most expensive price. After 1977, Robert Plant began actively distancing himself from the golden god image. He dressed more covered, interacted less, and almost never mentioned the past in interviews. Many critics say this was when Plant began to age not in years, but in spirit. Led Zeppelin continued to exist, but only in name. Internally, the bond between members had changed. Each carried their own crack. Bonham slid into alcohol. Page sank into control, obsession, and addiction. Jones withdrew into silence. Led Zeppelin continued to exist, but only in name. Internally, the bond between members had changed. Each carried their own crack. Bonham slid into alcohol. Page sank into control, obsession, and addiction. Jones withdrew into silence. And then, in 1980, the final blow fell. On the 25th of September 1980, John Bonham, the legendary drummer, Plant's closest friend in Led Zeppelin, passed away. John Bonham died at Jimmy Page's house after a night of heavy drinking. He died of asphyxiation in his sleep at age 32. If Karac's death was an unhealed wound, then Bonham's death was the end. Bonham was not just a band member. To Plant, he was the one who shared youth, wild years, and the darkest periods. Bonham's death did not just end Led Zeppelin. It ended an entire chapter of life. December 1980. Led Zeppelin officially disbanded. But what truly broke was the notion of a collective, where Plant did not have to carry pain alone. Led Zeppelin ended the way it had existed, suddenly, intensely, and leaving an unfillable void. In the official disbandment statement, Plant and the members wrote, "We cannot continue as before after losing our dear friend." But the deeper truth was, The band had lost its ability to heal long before that. Led Zeppelin created immortal music, but its internal workings taught Plant a painful lesson. Glory does not automatically bring safety, and a great collective can last a long time, even when the individuals inside are quietly crumbling. Robert Plant continued making music, composing, and performing, but he never tried to recreate Led Zeppelin. Some things, once broken, only hurt more when pieced back together. The most symbolic award in Robert Plant's life was Led Zeppelin's induction into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1995. It was official recognition of the band's undeniable influence on rock history. But that ceremony was unlike others, because John Bonham had been gone for 15 years. A band honored, but no longer whole enough to represent itself. Glory came late, and thus it carried a clear sense of emptiness. 3 blows, the accident, his son's death, and his best friend's passing changed Plant forever. From a wild voice, he became an artist, cautious with his own emotions. From an icon living for the present, he became a man carrying the past in every note. One thing that is hard to know whether to be sad or glad about: Robert Plant did not collapse publicly like many other great artists. No addiction, affairs, uncontrolled statements. He was silent. But that very restrained silence is what made the pain last decades. Plant learned to live with loss, but never learned to forget. After 1980, Robert Plant did not step into a brilliant new chapter, as many thought. He stepped into a void. Those who worked with him during this period all commented the same. Plant was gentler, quieter, and always carried a sadness hard to name. His marriage to Maureen Wilson also ended in 1983. The divorce was not noisy, but it left a cold truth. The family Plant had tried to hold at all costs could not be held. Plant once said in a rare conversation that he blamed no one because from the beginning, the path he chose was not meant for stability. Family was still there, but no longer whole as when he first stepped on stage. In the years that followed, Plant received countless offers to reunite Led Zeppelin. Figures mentioned in the media reached hundreds of millions of dollars. Just one tour, a few shows. Plant could live luxuriously for life without recording another note. But he always said no. "I cannot pretend everything is fine. There are people no longer here," he said. Led Zeppelin, to Plant, was not just music. It was Bonham. It was Karac. It was a version of life he no longer lived. Standing on that stage again, singing old songs, to him, was not honoring but betraying his own emotions. One thing few realize: Robert Plant did not abandon Led Zeppelin, he was forced to survive it. This choice made Plant a paradox in rock history. A man with enough power to live in luxury, yet choosing a minimalist life. A legend who could lean on legacy, yet stubbornly refusing to live off it. This disappointed, even angered many fans. But Plant understood. If he gave in to others' wishes, he would lose the remaining part of himself. Plant chose the harder path, going sideways. His solo career was not a journey to conquer charts. It was a journey to rediscover himself, bit by bit, after losing almost everything that once defined the old him. The debut solo album, Pictures at 11, was not a bang, but it was the first sign that Plant wanted to keep living, even if he did not yet know how. Then the principle of moments, now and zen. The music became less roaring, less showy. Instead came silences, contemplative melodies. No longer carrying a conquest spirit, it was exploratory. Plant experimented, failed, tried again. Not every album succeeded or was accepted by audiences. There were times Plant was criticized for running from Led Zeppelin's legacy. But he accepted that, because to Plant, being misunderstood was more bearable than living falsely. At the same time, age began leaving unavoidable marks. When at his peak, Plant's voice was always pushed to the limit every night. But those screams, those instinctive high notes, were not designed to last forever. The voice once considered one of the most powerful in rock history was gradually changing. High notes no longer came easily. Stage endurance was no longer the same. Plant did not deny it. In an interview with The Guardian, he said plainly, "I cannot sing like when I was 25, and I don't want to pretend I can." This acceptance was not easy, but Plant chose to adapt. From the late 1990 seconds onward, Robert Plant increasingly moved away from traditional rock structures. He turned to folk, blues, Americana, even Middle Eastern and African music genres that demand experience rather than power. He also collaborated with younger, less glamorous artists. In 2007, the album Raising Sand with Alison Krauss was released and won multiple Grammys. This was one of the rare moments after 1980 when Plant was spoken of as a winner. Plant received that success with a calm, almost detached. He continued living at his own pace, slower, smaller. His romantic life in later years was also not stable. Relationships came and went. Plant tried, but never recreated the sense of family as before. Family, in its complete sense, never returned to him. Daughters grown up, son gone. Full family dinners existed only in memory. Plant did not talk much about this, but he admitted in a rare interview with Uncut magazine, "There are losses that leave you not knowing how to rebuild from scratch." Gradually, Robert Plant learned to live with it. He no longer tried to push it away, but let it exist as part of his life. Music, therefore, was no longer a place of victory. It became a shelter, a safe space where he could exist without having to force himself to be strong. Plant kept moving forward, but no longer moving up in the sense the world was used to. He walked slower, quieter, carrying what could not be left behind. He still stood on stage, still created, but lived in a world missing the people who once made that journey meaningful. Robert Plant, during this time, wrote the story of a survivor. Robert Plant was learning to exist without we. At his current age of 77, Robert Plant does not live in a grand castle, nor appear regularly on massive stages. He chooses rural Worcestershire where small roads wind around fields. Mornings begin with birdsong, not crowd screams. A very real peace, but also a peace with no one to share. He has not vanished from the world, but he actively stands outside its noisiest part. Plant lost the companions from his golden era. Those who once stood with him on stage, understood him with just a glance, now exist only in memory. The family that was once a place to return to is no longer whole. In an interview with the New York Times, Plant said a very light sentence that left a long echo. "The people who understood me best, they are no longer here." In the present, Plant still performs, but not 100,000-person stadiums. Rather, small venues, theaters, concert halls, moderate festivals. There, the audience does not scream for the golden god, but sits quietly listening. Plant still appears occasionally at select music events, professional tribute shows, or short interviews related to new projects. He comes, says just enough, then leaves. That change is not because Plant is no longer sought after, but because he can no longer bear having to force himself into the icon of a dead era. He has also declined many nostalgic Led Zeppelin events. In recent performances, people notice Plant rarely sings original Led Zeppelin songs. And if he does, he turns them into a different version. Slower, deeper, further from old memories. This is very important to understand Plant's psychology today. He does not run from memory, but also does not allow it to take over the present. This is very important to understand Plant's psychology today. He does not run from memory, but also does not allow it to take over the present. He sings many songs that are not his own folk songs, old blues, traditional folk, as if Plant is borrowing others' stories to speak for the things he no longer has the strength to name. Plant once shared that he loves old folk songs because they belong to no one. When he sings old blues or American folk, he is not the legend, he is just a storyteller. And perhaps that is the only role he still wants to keep. Today, Plant still creates. But every new song carries a clear feeling: alone. Today's Robert Plant is not tragic, but he is solitary. A man still alive, still walking, still singing. But most of his life, the people he loved, the versions of himself have stayed behind. Plant no longer talks about ambition. He does not talk about long-term plans. His new projects do not carry a manifesto spirit, but feel like belated notes from someone who has walked very far. Music is no longer for assertion, but to keep himself from drifting away. The young people around him look at him with admiration, but admiration does not replace companionship. They know who Plant is, but they do not know what Plant had to lose to become that person. And Plant understands that better than anyone. There is a kind of solitude that only appears when you live long enough to see all your old versions disappear one by one. Robert Plant has lived through too many such versions. The boy obsessed with Elvis, the wandering blues young man, the screaming voice on stage, the father who lost his child, the friend who lost his confidant, the man who refused to return to glory. Most of Robert Plant's life, the things that define who he is, have stayed behind, in rooms no longer opened, people who no longer return, and melodies he chooses not to sing anymore. After a life full of shocks, Plant's present passes in a rhythm strangely steady. He wakes up in the countryside, where no one calls his name except neighbors accustomed to living next to a legend who does not want to be referred to as a legend. Plant reads, listens to music, walks, occasionally practices his voice. And perhaps, after all that has been lost, safety is what Plant treasures most. What moves Robert Plant is no longer applause. Plant once shared that he is most touched when the audience does not demand he become someone else. When they accept the changed voice, do not wait for high notes that no longer exist. When they come to listen, not to verify their own memories. One thing very few mention, Plant almost never talks about the future. All projects are spoken of in the present or recent past, as if he has accepted that his life is no longer measured by milestones, but by the quiet time between memories. Robert Plant currently maintains good and respectful relationships with his surviving children, especially daughter Carmen Plant. Plant rarely speaks publicly about his children, but in interviews, he always emphasizes trying to be with them more than the lost years. However, that relationship does not have a clingy appearance. Plant chooses to be close, but one step back. In an interview with The Guardian, Plant once said roughly that he treasures family, but no longer tries to make up for the past with the present, because there are things that cannot be fixed. That shows he loves family, but does not live entirely dependent on family. Robert Plant now has very few close friends, but the remaining ones are relationships lasting decades. He still keeps in touch with John Paul Jones, but the relationship is one of respect and history, not everyday intimacy. With Jimmy Page, the relationship is almost frozen. No public conflict, but no closeness either. The two exist like parallel lines shared past, but no longer meeting. This is not the story of a faded legend. It is the story of the very human price of glory. When you go too far, too fast, to the point no one can walk with you. And perhaps Robert Plant's greatest sadness is not in what he lost, but in that he is still alive to remember it all. Robert Plant today is not a grand tragedy. He is the very human aftermath of a life too large. If looking back at Robert Plant's entire journey, his greatest legacy may not only lie in the music, it lies in knowing when to stop, knowing to leave while still able to decide, knowing not to turn the past into a life raft for the present. In a world that worships immortality and constantly demands legends return, Plant chooses to silently step to the sidelines. And perhaps the most lingering thing Robert Plant's story leaves is not clear sadness, but a lingering question with no answer. If he had not become a legend, would he have lived a more complete life? No one answers, not even Robert Plant. And that very silence is what makes his story stay long in the hearts of listeners. If Robert Plant's voice has ever stayed with you through long, quiet nights, please like this video, share it with those who also grew up alongside that music, and leave a comment. It doesn't need to be long, just a single feeling is enough. Think of it as a very gentle thank you, sent to the man who spent his entire life singing the things we could never quite put into words ourselves. Subscribe to the channel to continue walking with us through the stories that live beyond the spotlight, where legends are seen not as distant icons, but as deeply real human beings.